Hey everyone, ready for another deep dive? You guys sent in some fascinating sources about the upcoming election, and wow, there are some strong opinions about Donald Trump floating around out there.
Yeah.
We've got excerpts from this MSNBC broadcast, and let me tell you, they are not holding back.
Sounds like we've got our work cut out for us. Always exciting to dig into these politically charged sources.
So right off the bat, the thing that really jumped out was this comparison between Trump and, get this, Hitler. Expert speaker, can you help us break down this explosive claim? What's the context here?
Well, this one's a doozy. It actually comes from John Kelly, Trump's former chief of staff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, pretty surprising, right? Anyway, according to this MSNBC broadcast, Kelly alleges that Trump expressed admiration for Hitler and even wished that his own generals would be more like Hitler's generals.
More like Hitler's generals. What does that even mean?
Well, the broadcast goes on to explain that Kelly claims Trump wanted his generals to prioritize loyalty to him over everything else, even, the Constitution. Seriously? Wow, if that's true, that's a pretty chilling thought. Loyalty to one person above the law of the land. That's not how our democracy works, right, listeners?
No, not at all. And it's even more, I don't know, intriguing maybe, because as this MSNBC commentator Lawrence O'Donnell points out, Trump hasn't come out and publicly denounced Hitler or these claims.
Huh, that is interesting. Do you think that silence is a strategic move? Like, is he trying to control the story by just not engaging with it?
You know, that's a really good point. There are definitely a few ways to look at it. On the one hand, not addressing it directly might be a way to let it, just fade away, avoid giving it more attention, right?
Right.
But on the other hand, and this is where it gets kind of tricky, some of his supporters might see his silence as agreement, like he's quietly endorsing these views. What do you think, listeners? It's a lot to process, for sure. Absolutely. Another thing that caught my eye was this part about tariffs. They're saying they're like a Trump national sales tax. I got to admit, that one took me a few reads to really wrap my head around.
Huh?
Can you break it down for us, expert speaker? What's this whole national sales tax argument all about?
Yeah, it's a bit dense, isn't it? So basically, a tariff is a tax on goods that are imported from other countries. So think about it like this. You're at the store, you're looking at a new TV, and because of these tariffs, the price has gone up, like, let's say, $100.
Okay, I'm following so far.
That extra $100, that's the tariff essentially being passed on to you, the consumer.
Oh, I see. So it's not China paying these tariffs like Trump says. It's us, the shoppers, who end up paying more.
That's exactly the argument MSNBC is making. They're saying these tariffs are like a hidden tax, a national sales tax that Americans are paying without even realizing it. And get this, they're connecting this directly to Kamala Harris's campaign strategy.
Really? How so?
Well, she's basically using these tariffs as a way to show how, everyday Americans are being hurt. You remember that TV example?
Yeah.
She's taking that kind of scenario and using it to connect with voters, especially those who are feeling the pressure of rising prices, It's a way to make this issue feel real and relatable.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this fits into the bigger picture. By calling these tariffs a hidden tax, Harris is making it a pocketbook issue, something that voters really care about.
Exactly. She's shifting the focus away from, abstract economic policy and towards something that people feel in their daily lives. Pretty smart, right?
Yeah, definitely a strategic move. Now, speaking of strategies,
It's pretty interesting that we haven't really heard how Trump is directly responding to all these accusations, especially that whole Hitler thing. It's pretty noticeable, his silence.
yeah, it's deafening, almost, isn't it? But MSNBC did mention Trump's response to the whole national sales tax criticism about those tariffs.
Yeah.
The argument that they're really hitting American shoppers hard.
Right. And his reaction there was, well, revealing, you could say. He denies that his tariffs are anything like a national sales tax, insists those tariffs are being paid by the countries he says are abusing the system, like China, probably. He's adamant it's not coming out of American consumers' pockets.
But like we talked about, MSNBC saying that's just not true. They even imply that even Fox News, which usually backs Trump up, doesn't really get how tariffs actually work.
Exactly. And that just shows how hard it can be to figure out what's really going on in politics these days. You've got these totally opposite stories, both being presented as, like, the absolute truth, and the average person is left wondering who they can even believe anymore. Have you ever felt that way, listener? Trying to sift through all these claims and figure out what's real.
Oh, all the time. It's exhausting. So when it comes to these tariffs, how should we be thinking about them? Like, what can voters do to make sense of all these totally different claims about how they're impacting things?
The key is to, be a critical thinker. Don't just take what you hear from sources you usually agree with at face value. You have to actively look for other perspectives, even ones you might not like at first. Look at the evidence, think about who's presenting it, and try to figure out if they might have a bias.
So you're saying I shouldn't just, like, automatically believe everything MSNBC is saying, even though they seem to be explaining things pretty clearly.
Right. Their explanation might be accurate, but remember, they're presenting it within this specific political context. Their goal is to challenge Trump's policies and support the Democrats. So it's smart to get other viewpoints, maybe from economists who aren't tied to either party, to really understand the whole picture.
This whole thing reminds me of those debates about trade deals like NAFTA and the TPP. There was such strong opinions on both sides, and it was so hard to figure out what the actual effects would be for, regular people.
That's a great comparison. Trade policy is so complicated, it's really hard to predict how things will actually play out, who will benefit and who will get hurt. It's easy to get caught up in all the emotional arguments, but voters need to really think about how these policies will affect them personally and their communities.
It seems like that's a big theme in this election. The need to be super careful about what information we're taking in and to really try to look at things from different angles.
Absolutely. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with information, being able to think critically is more important than ever.
Okay, so we've seen Obama and Harris really going after Trump, but what about his side of things? What's his campaign strategy?
Well, even though these sources don't really say what Trump's campaign is focusing on, we can get some clues from, the broader political landscape.
Hmm.
In the past, his campaigns have been all about things like nationalism, putting American workers first, and being against the establishment.
So you're thinking he'll probably keep pushing those same ideas in this election, especially with all these attacks coming at him.
It's definitely possible. With all the heat he's facing, he might feel like he needs to appeal to his base even more strongly. Really push that America First message and play up the idea that he's the victim of unfair attacks from the deep state or the liberal media or whatever.
Yeah, that sounds familiar. But wouldn't that approach just make the country even more divided?
That's the risk, and a lot of political analysts are worried about that. How much will Trump prioritize bringing the country together versus, using those divisions to his advantage? It's hard to say.
That's a big question voters have to consider. Do they want a leader who will try to, bridge the gap, or someone who might make things even worse?
Exactly. And it comes back to critical thinking. Voters need to think deeply about what each candidate's approach might mean for the country and make a decision based on their own values, what they care about most.
Man, this has been a lot to take in. We've talked about some serious accusations, complicated economic stuff, campaign strategies, everything. Before we head into the last part of our deep dive, what are some key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
It's really been, illuminating to look at these sources, They really highlight just how intense this election is. The stakes are high. The rhetoric is, heated. There's a lot of division in the country. And that makes it, I think, even more important for voters to be informed, engaged, and, think critically about all this information they're getting.
And remember that there are multiple perspectives on every issue. Actually seeking those out can help us all, understand these complex challenges better.
Absolutely. It's not about just picking a side and sticking with it, It's about actually having those thoughtful conversations, looking at the evidence and trying to make informed decisions because ultimately those decisions shape our country.
Yeah, well said. Now, we can't talk about this election without addressing, the media. What role do you think the media is playing in all this? These sources seem to have some pretty strong opinions about that.
Oh, for sure. The media plays a huge role. And these sources give us some, I think, pretty interesting insights, like that MSNBC broadcast we've been talking about. It's a perfect example of how media outlets, especially those with a, clear political leaning, can shape how people see an election.
They definitely seem to be pushing a particular agenda, right? Painting Trump in a negative light and presenting the Democrats as the good guys. Pretty obvious, I think, even to the average listener, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's not that it's necessarily wrong for a media outlet to have a perspective, but viewers need to recognize that bias and think about how it might be affecting what they're seeing.
So it's like they're filtering the news through their own lens, and that lens changes how they show us the facts.
That's a great way to put it. Imagine you're looking at a landscape through glasses with different colored lenses. Each pair highlights certain parts of the view and downplays others, right? Same with media outlets. Their political views influence which stories they cover, how they tell those stories, and whose voices they choose to, amplify.
Okay, I'm with you. So how can we, like regular viewers, how can we deal with all this and make sure we're getting, the full picture? It can be so overwhelming.
It can be. It's really about, diversifying your information diet. Don't just rely on one source for everything. Try to find outlets with different viewpoints, even ones you might disagree with. Expose yourself to different perspectives, and then, think critically about the motivations and biases of each source.
So you're saying we should be reading both MSNBC and Fox News, even though they often seem to be reporting on totally different events?
Yeah, basically. It's not about finding some perfectly neutral source, because let's be honest, that's pretty rare. It's more about seeing those different perspectives and then evaluating the information yourself. Ask yourself, what are they focusing on? What are they not talking about? Who are they quoting? Who are they ignoring? It's all about those questions.
That's a really good point. And it's not just about recognizing bias, right? It's also about being aware of how information can be, well, manipulated through things like editing, emotional appeals,
Yeah.
even misleading statistics.
You got it. We have to be savvy consumers of information. Always question what we see, think about why someone's telling us something. You know what I mean?
Totally. So how do you think all this whole media landscape is going to affect the election?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I don't think anyone has a clear answer. But I think we can say that the media is definitely going to have a huge impact on how people see the candidates and the issues. They'll highlight certain things, downplay others, and they'll give a platform to some voices while silencing others. That's a lot of power.
It's like they get to decide what's important and what's not. What we should care about, what we should be angry about. It's kind of scary, actually.
It is, in a way. The media has a lot of power.
Yeah.
And with that power comes, responsibility, I think. A responsibility to inform the public honestly and fairly. But honestly, that doesn't always happen. Voters need to know that, to be aware of how they might be manipulated.
Okay, so as we're wrapping up our deep dive here, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember? What should they be thinking about as we head into this election with all this media frenzy happening?
The most important thing is to be active, to be engaged, and to think critically about the information you're getting. Don't just passively absorb it all. Question everything, seek out different perspectives, and really think about the motivations behind everything you're seeing and hearing.
Yeah.
Our democracy depends on an informed and engaged citizenry, and that starts with, being media literate.
That's powerful stuff. We all have a role to play in making sure this election is fair and that people are actually informed.
Absolutely. The choices we make as voters, they're only as good as the information we base them on. So let's all try to be thoughtful about the information we consume, think critically, and have those respectful conversations, even with people we disagree with.
So listener, this election, it's going to be a wild ride for sure. But if we stay curious, stay informed, stay engaged, and remember to think critically, I think we can all navigate this crazy world and make informed choices that'll shape our future. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. And remember, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.